phones and laptops and devices to silent, please. No fire alarm tests planned today? Yes, there is a fire alarm test today.
Yes, so it's Thursday, so yes, maybe at 10 o'clock.
Right, okay. But it's just a test, it's not a practice, so it'll just go off and we'll just pause and, okay. So if the alarm goes off at 10 o'clock, we don't need to do anything. If the alarm goes off, presumably at another time, we do need to do something, which involves evacuating the building, following the green emergency exit signs. The programme officer, Ian Kemp, is not around today, but he can be contacted by phone or email if you need to, or if there's any sort of procedural queries about the venue, etc. You can have a word with one of the council officers and we'll sort it out. So this additional hearing is to discuss two separate matters previously discussed at earlier sessions, which have subsequently been subject to modifications proposed by the council in response to action points that I published following the earlier discussion. So an agenda was published for, last week for today, and that sets out the two items that we're dealing with, which are relating to policy DM4, sustainable homes and businesses, RSA 25, Long Copse Farm, Enbourne. What we'll probably do is have a break for about 20 minutes when we've finished the first item on the agenda, i.e. policy DM4, and then start again after the break on the policy RSA 25. So I'll let people introduce themselves shortly, but after that, if those only interested in policy RSA 25 want to leave the table, and indeed the room, until the break, they can do so, rather than sit and listen to discussions about energy efficiency and technicalities of policy DM4. If you wish to stay, you're free to do so. I'll leave it up to you. I understand that RPS, right, sorry, I didn't recognise the face. I got a message from the programme, so we were running a little late. Anyway, I was just explaining, I don't know if you heard that we won't be commencing the discussion about RSA 25 until after we've had a break this morning. So you can relax and catch breath before we start on that. So just a reminder, as in previous sessions, I'll start each agenda item with some questions to the council. And when we've heard the responses to those, I'll invite contributions from others. When you wish to speak, please put your nameplate on its end and I'll bring you in at an appropriate time. At which point you please put your microphone on and by pressing the button and the red light should come on. And then remember to turn it off when you finish speaking. So I'll go around the room now and let people introduce themselves, and then you can decide whether you wish to leave the table until the break. I'll have a pause at that point. So could we start with the council, please?
Morning, sir. Emmeline Lambert, barrister for the council.
Morning, sir. Marina Goodyear, energy and carbon contributor for the council.
Morning, sir. Emily Ashton-Jelly, Principal Environment Delivery Officer, West Berkshire Council.
Shukri Masuri, West Berkshire District Council.
Paula Amarelli, West Berkshire Council.
Cheryl Willett, West Berkshire Council.
Paul Goddard, West Berkshire Council Highways. I know I'm not be needed, but I just sit and work.
No, you never know when you might be needed, Mr. Goddard. You seem to like spending your time in here, so. Okay.
Valerie Boland, Chairperson for Enbourne Parish Council.
Christopher Garrett, Councillor, Enbourne Parish Council.
Peter Tompkins, Enbourne Parish Council.
Rob White, representing Bloor Homes.
Good morning, sir. Mark Barrett from Home Builders Federation. Sorry.
I'll leave it. Do you want to? You can stay if you wish. Or you... Okay. Yeah. Anyway, I'll make sure you're aware of when we're moving on to the next item, and we'll have a break before then, so it'll become clear. Okay. Right. So unless there's any queries from anyone, we'll start on the first agenda item, which is about policy DM4. As I said, we've had a previous discussion about this. That was back in the 5th of June, I think. Following which I published 2 action points, and the council's responses to those were published on the 20th of June 2024 in document exam 39. Those responses proposed a main modification to policy DM4 part 1A, second bullet point, relating to the fabric energy efficiency of dwellings, the targets in there. And I think the idea that may be necessary had been first actually suggested at the hearing session, so it followed up from that. So that was published, and then the response to AP 38 also set out some more information about the cost assumptions relating to the policy DM4 that had been made in the viability assessment of the plan. So that was to provide further clarity on that. And it again rated, following on from some issues discussed at that time. Okay, so they were published, as I say, in 20th of June, following which representations were made by both Bloor Homes and HBF, and they were published on the 18th of July and the 1st of August, respectively. So I've got all that. I then published my supplementary questions, and the council and the HBF have both provided further statements in response to those, and they were published on the 10th of September. Bloor Homes, I know you didn't publish another statement, but obviously you'd made the representation, and presumably that's the information that you rely on. So that's fine. So I've got all that. That's all been read. I think I'll say understood, but we'll have a discussion about it today, and we'll see where we end up on that. So any queries about anyone about that sort of background to where we've got to and the process we've been through? Okay. I mean, I'm also aware that there's been reference to, the other thing that Bloor Homes obviously drew to our attention, and I asked a question about, was the written ministerial statement and the subsequent legal challenge and the court judgment about that. And I don't think I've actually got any questions about that. Obviously that written ministerial stays in place, but if you've got anything that you wish to elaborate on in what you've said about the implications of it as we go through the questions today, anyone, you can obviously let me know. But I think I understand the position with relation to that. But as I say, that's another bit of information, evidence or that's become available subsequent to when we last discussed this. Okay, so I'll just run through a few sort of questions and clarifications, just to make sure I understand from the council's point of view, and then I'll open it up. So the modification to the DM4 part 1A, the second bullet point that's now before us, it basically sets different fabric energy efficiency standards for different types of dwellings, expressed using the building regulations metric of SAP, fabric energy efficiency. Yeah. Okay, so that's fine. And you say, I think that the reason that became necessary subsequent to when the plan had been prepared was because of further analysis that had become available. Not that was national analysis, is it? Not something that you'd done. It was something that became available for you to consider.
That's absolutely right. Yeah. So the analysis that became available since we originally drafted the target was produced by the Future Homes Hub. So it's not a government entity as such, but it's a collaboration between industry, NGOs and various others, which I think includes various developers as well as organisations like my own, which are focused on sustainability. And that produced some analysis looking at the metrics, the levels, the standards that would be achieved by different homes in a range of different performance metrics, including SAP fabric energy efficiency, depending on what kind of fabric those different houses have. And it looked at a whole range of different home types as well. So that's what we responded to.
Okay. And the reason that you felt, or the council felt, that the policy as submitted needed to be modified, was that because it set one single standard that wouldn't have been applicable for the different dwelling types?
Yeah.
Practical reasons, but also viability reasons.
It's for practical reasons and viability reasons.
Yeah,
exactly
okay.
Right. Yeah. So it's for practical reasons to respond to, oh, okay, if a home had the standard of fabric that we've assumed it will have, which was at the time in line with the indicative future home standard, actually its fabric energy efficiency standard would be this range of different levels rather than the one level that we had hoped it might be. And that modification, I think, was necessary, not just because of that practicality issue, because it is possible to go further, but the costs evidence that we had relied on had assumed a certain level of fabric, which was in line with that indicative future home standard fabric. And that's what we wanted to kind of stay in line with.
Okay, so it was the viability issue, at least in the short term, that was driving the need to have the distinguish between the different types of dwellings.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Okay.
It's the main one. Yeah.
And the way that the policy, I don't want to go back over the parts of the policy that hasn't been subsequently modified or and we discussed last time, but policy DM4 Part 1A, the first bullet point, sets the target emission rate standards, and they're expressed in terms of the percentage reduction based on the future home standard when it comes in.
Yes,
And in the interim, a 63% reduction,
yes.
which is less than the future home standard will be.
The 63% reduction is roughly in line with what the government has been saying the future home
Right,
standard will
okay.
do. But we're saying that should be achieved through energy efficiency measures only,
Yes.
by which we include fabric, anything in the building that reduces energy use compared to what it would otherwise be. So that would include things like switching to a heat pump as opposed to having a gas boiler. We're counting that as an energy efficiency measure. So yes, that's right.
Yeah, okay, so so which brings us on to the modified fabric energy efficiency. They are one of the steps in achieving the TER.
That's
It's
exactly
not
right.
over and above it, it's within
No.
it.
That's precisely right, yeah.
Yeah, okay. And then later on in the policy, it talks about the on-site renewable and low carbon energy to then achieve if you haven't got down to zero by the energy efficiency, etc., the energy that you do use be generated by the low energy or renewable sources on site.
That's exactly right, yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
okay. So that's the construct. And you say that this whole approach, I'm just trying to understand how this relates to the building regulations and future home standards. On one level, you're using the methodology and the metrics, but there seems to be a concern that the council has that just relying even in the future on the building regulations won't actually go far enough
That's
in
correct.
achieving net zero and what the council wishes to achieve.
That's right, yeah. So the future home standard is still in flux. We still don't know exactly what it will look like. There have been 3 potential specifications for the future home standard released by government to date. One of those was released in the, I think, 2019-20 consultation, and then 2 further options were released in the more recent consultation, which kicked off in December 2023, and I think it ran until about March this year. So firstly, none of them go far enough to achieve the energy efficiency level that the Committee on Climate Change has said is necessary in order for the UK to meet its carbon budgets. However, the first of those 3 specifications was significantly more energy efficient than the second and third specifications that were released more recently. And so the policy, in order to be broadly in line with what the Future Home Stand was doing, it sets the fabric level at the standard of the first of those 3 specifications that have been released, because that fabric is significantly better. It gets closer to that level that the Committee on Climate Change has said is necessary for national carbon budgets. And that is partly to protect against the increased bills that would come if there is weaker fabric. So of those 2 later specifications, they are not really proposing to improve fabric, or barely improving it at all in one of the options and not improving it at all in the other option. And the option that does not improve fabric results in bill costs of about heating bills about double those that they are a new bill today. So that's the main thing we're protecting against, that and the carbon budget issue.
So irrespective of what the building regs may or may not do, and even if they are improved, this policy would be a guarantee that development in West Berkshire would actually achieve a higher standard in the net effect, the net zero, by going through these steps.
Yes, or it's protecting against the risk that the Future Home Standard takes a weaker form rather than the strongest of the 3 forms we've seen so far.
Yeah, okay. Right, so I'll let the HBF and Bloor Homes contribute in a minute, but my understanding of one of the concerns they have about the way it's constructed is that the written ministerial statement is written in a way that it deals with viability, which you've addressed, and we can come on to that shortly. But it also seems to be quite prescriptive about how any energy efficiency targets are expressed. And it's not just general consistency with building regulations, it's a very specific element of building regulations. And they say, I think the HBF say, well, that's deliberate, because that then it gives flexibility to the industry about how to achieve that TER reduction. Whereas the approach you're taking is more prescriptive. So by taking that approach, it is not consistent with the written ministerial statement. I think that's basically the point. Mark Parent's nodding. So do you want to respond to that?
Yeah, absolutely. So the written ministerial statement says that if you're going to have an energy efficiency policy, and I want to stress that it is energy efficiency only that the
Yeah,
WMS
but this is energy efficient.
Yeah,
Do we
absolutely,
clarify
yeah.
that? And it's, I don't
Yeah. So it asks you to express that. It says you should, if you're going to have one, it should be expressed in terms of percentage reduction in TER.
Yeah.
So we have done that. We've got our 63% reduction in TER through energy efficiency measures. And that is how we have used the TER to express energy efficiency. There's a bit of difficulty in that TER is not in fact an energy efficiency metric. So it's a bit frustrating that the WMS says you've got to use a carbon metric to express energy efficiency. However, we've done it. And the TFEE is not separate to that, is a contributory measure, and it is in line with that same TER reduction that we've aimed for as the overall energy efficiency target. I will just also make the point that the rationale of the WMS is that government wants to avoid what they're calling proliferation of standards across the country. The context in which that written ministerial statement was made is one in which there were several emerging plans, some of which have now been adopted, which used completely different metrics that aren't even from building regs at all. So the rationale of it is to stick within building regs because they're metrics that developers are used to working with and which are kind of commonly used. So we see it that this is something that all adds up to the same rationale as the WMS is using.
So yeah, I think you would probably concede that it's not, in a very strict interpretation of what the written ministerial statement says, it's not quite doing it, but you're saying it doesn't actually contravene any of the intention or the incentive behind the written ministerial statement.
Well, we think that it doesn't contravene the written ministerial statement at all.
Right.
Because the written ministerial statement says you have to express it in terms of TER, but it doesn't say that you can't use supplementary metrics as stepping stones towards that. It doesn't say you can't use any other metrics. It just says that you should express your overall energy efficiency standard in terms of percentage reduction on TER. But if you as the inspector interpret it differently, we feel that in general, the TFE is still consistent with the rationale of the WMS.
Okay, thank you. Right. And the other issues around the other elements of the M4 that deal with regulated and unregulated emissions and carbon offsetting and those sort of things we've discussed. And they're not caught by the written ministerial statement because they're not strictly energy efficiency. And then there's questions about whether they're justified in terms of, and then there's more general policies in the NPPF about achieving radical reductions in carbon emissions, et cetera, which I know in the climate change acts, etc. So I know the context for that. So, okay, thank you. Right. Just finally then on the costs, I think that you provided the extra information and HBF and Bloor Homes can talk about it if they wish to do so. I think HBF seemed to say that a 5% uplift in build costs, which is what you say, is basically been what's factored into the viability assessment, and that was agreed with the viability consultants and yourselves. So you worked together on that. It seems reasonable, but they also suggest that actually, well, that's measured against the cost of a one-off house, the percentage. And if you applied the absolute additional cost against a lower cost of a new estate house, which I think is what you're saying, which is a lower cost per square metre, it would represent a 7% increase rather than 5% increase. Do you agree or disagree with that?
I disagree with it mainly because as the estate house, I think the reason why that estate house baseline is lower is because you're achieving economies of scale by doing lots of houses at the same time. Is that the correct argument? Is that the reason why?
Well, maybe, yeah.
Okay, sure.
Yeah.
So when you deliver homes at scale, the costs go down because you get those economies of scale, you get those efficiencies, those supply chains and so on. However, the uplifts would also achieve those economies of scale. So we've taken our cost uplifts from two sources. One was the Future Homes Impact Assessment from the government released at the same time that they released the spec on which our policy is based. And the second is a piece of analysis from Cornwall Council's local plan evidence, and that's an adopted plan now. So we looked there at the cost of achieving similar fabric, adding a heat pump and adding a certain amount of solar panels. The Cornwall evidence was looking at just building a single house, which per square meter is always going to be more expensive, but also per square, like per fabric upgrade, per heat pump and everything else, that would also be more expensive too. So we thought it more logical to convert all of those source costs into an uplift on the source baseline, rather than trying to take it and compare it directly to the West Berkshire baseline, because time's moved on, inflation's changed, build costs may have changed, the scale may have changed, there's regional differences as well. So we thought it more logical to convert it into a percentage and then apply that percentage to the West Berkshire baseline rather than comparing directly the absolute.
But the percentage is derived from an absolute cost.
Yes, it's derived from absolute costs from our source data,
Yeah.
which we translated into a percentage on the baseline from our source data.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Anything else the council wants to say before I open it up? No? Okay, thank you. Right. Over to this side. Yeah.
Just in terms of the costs, I think in terms of what's been said, yes, there is economies of scales in terms of the estate level housing, but that doesn't necessarily always going to translate across into say heat pumps and everything else at the moment. It may in future, but obviously, you know, that they haven't been introduced. They may not actually scale up in the same way and have the same level of economies of scale as you would do in terms of the delivery. Just because there is still, I think, the Future Homes Hub acknowledged there's still quite a lot of skills. A lot of the reason why you have a lead in time is to ensure that the industries are there and the skills are there to be able to deliver that at the same level of cost and achieve potentially those economies of scale in future. So it's not necessarily that like for like in terms of that. I think in terms of the approach taken by council and in terms of the fabric and efficiency, recognise that it is within SAP, and I think that's that's a in terms of consistent with that, but I don't think it is consistent necessarily with that what the written ministerial statement saying. The written ministerial is very clear in terms of that it should be around TER. And I think it is in terms of around what the building regulations are there. And I think that really comes down to, you know, if we look at the Planning and Energy Act itself, sir, which I think states in Part B and set in that they have to be set out or referred to in regulations made by appropriate national authority. Sorry, this is Part A of Section 2 of that, and then set out or endorsed in national policies or guidance issued by the appropriate national authority. So it is clear in terms of that if the government, you know, the written ministerial statement is what should be applied and how it should be applied. And whilst they recognise the council saying, well, actually, this is something within that, the government they haven't said, but also equally they haven't said that you can do that. And so that's, I suppose, up to you, sir, in terms of that assessment of saying, actually, is an omission saying, yes, you can do it, or is that omission saying, well, actually, no, you shouldn't be doing that? And I think that's the difficulty you have, sir, in terms of that. I think what we do have is a consultation on the Future Home Standard that doesn't look to increase that fabric energy efficiency standard that the council are referring to within the new Future Home Standard. This is a Future Home Standard that we believe is going to be endorsed in terms of the new government and going through in terms of the consultation. We don't know yet because obviously there's still a lot still responses to be considered and taken forward. But what we do know is that doesn't, as the council recognise, that doesn't include improvements to the fabric energy efficiency for a range of reasons in terms of costs and follow-on costs to in terms of the price of houses and the economies of scale with regard to that. So I think there are concerns that the council are moving away from what the government are proposing. I think and it is that, as we say, about the flexibility in terms of actually recognising that local authorities, that, you know, the Planning and Energy Act hasn't been revoked and can set a higher standard, but it should be within the requirements set out in the WMS. and that's around the TER. And actually having that flexibility with regard to actually how we meet those standards as an industry, I think is important. And I suppose that's our position, sir. And I suppose it is just one that is diametrically opposed to what the council is saying, not in terms of actually saying, yep, recognise that the council can do this, but wanting it within that framework that's clearly been set out through the WMS and then going forward into the future home standards.
I mean, the council outlined, some on the face of it, good reasons why fabric energy efficiency is a sensible thing to do from the outset when you build a house. I mean, you wouldn't dispute that as a matter of principle, but you're saying, but there's a caveat to that, and that's recognised by the government. If it was that simple, yes, that's what the future home standard would say. Is that basically what you're saying?
Yes, that's essentially it. And I think the other side to this, and there's obviously viability issues that need to be considered, which the council have considered and looked at in terms of but it's also the deliverability element that is set out really within the WMS. How is this going to impact on how many homes come forward and the delivery of homes? And I think this is one of the reasons why we have a phased implementation in terms of the future home standard. Are we going to be able to deliver the homes that the country needs if the standards are significantly higher? And it's how that's balanced. And how that works with regard to the standards that the council approach, I don't know whether the council actually has looked at that in terms of rates of delivery and how that's going to come along, and whether they've spoken to house builders to say, actually, can you meet this within that? Is it going to impact on the rates of which homes will be delivered? I suppose it's that piece of work that I think seems to be missing from within the council's evidence.
I mean, you've both the council and yourselves have referred to a number of local plans that have been adopted in recent years that have different sorts of standards in them that go beyond, which is kind of what prompted the written ministerial statement, as the council say. I mean, it's probably unfair to throw this at you, but I mean, is there any sort of evidence that you've had as HBF from house builders that have been operating in those areas where those local plans have been introduced that has actually led to, actual real examples of stalling developments?
We haven't got examples. They're quite new in terms of if you look at I think the Cornwall example is the most recent, which is only 2 years ago in terms of what's come forward. There are developments that have come forward at higher standards. I recognise that. I know in terms around Cambridge, but they're very specifically around being come through from Cambridge University owned land and have taken a hit in terms of the land value, in terms of some of those going forward to allow those significantly higher standards. So I think there's still time to work through in terms of how this is going to impact on development. So I think it's in the early days from our understanding. Some will be able to deliver it at a higher standard because they may well already be going that way. But this is about across the piece in terms of all developers, whether it's the smaller ones or up to the large, Persimmon and the large scale developers. So it is a range. Some will be able to, and some we'll see it have a very significant impact in terms of the rate at which they can deliver homes, and having to really reconfigure how they
Okay, I guess it's finished. Yeah. Okay. Sorry, Mr. Rhodes.
reconfigure how they would deliver those homes and the rate at which they can deliver. So I think it would be swings and roundabouts depending on which developer. So it's difficult. So I think that's some of the difficulties, that it will impact on different developments differently in terms of that, and that's why essentially the HBF and our members really want that very consistent framework through the building regulations, and actually find it difficult in terms of different planning regimes and in different local authorities having different standards. But I think that's our position, sir.
Yeah. Okay.
And, I'll use that alarm as a signal to shift that.
Understood, thank you. Right, yeah, Bloor Homes then.
Thank you. I think it's perhaps useful rather than getting mired in the details, just stand back here, that the building regulations cover a vast number of different areas.
Sorry.
Building regulations cover all sorts of things, including energy performance. They're set by government based on national research, and they provide the playbook, if you like, for house builders and non-resi house builders. There seems to have been a fixation on trying to go beyond Part L for a number of years, that the government has been quite clear, and the courts have been clear, should not go beyond, should only express things as percentages or TER, and not start introducing different measures that constrain how house builders across all rates, all sizes, in all locations across the country and in different settings within a local authority area. That's their performance standard. It's up to them how they meet it. And going beyond this, and how, I mean, if we just stand back on West Berkshire's evidence, we've had a whole raft of evidence that a policy is drafted that West Berkshire subsequently said, oh no, that's not reliable. So the 15 thingy, whatever it was. So we had all run around and talked about this and looked at it, and now that's gone. Now we brought something else in from a similar body, that's a non-government body, that's saying, oh, well, let's use this. And then we're going back on a TER value on something that was consulted on in 2019, but there's been subsequently 4 years later, different consultations on. We're trying to prejudge what the future home standard is going to be. The future home standard will be here in 2025. And it's going to be around in the council's own evidence, a 75% improvement on 2013 building regs. So 75% improvement in just over 10 years. This government's committed to net zero carbon by 2030. This week, we saw the closing of the final coal-fired power stations. The whole energy supply grid is going to go zero carbon. And yet we seem to be intent on making things harder and harder to build in West Berkshire compared to building a house just down the road. It doesn't seem sensible to do that. We should express a policy as TER, full stop. Leave it there. And in the discussion on costs, whether it's 5%, 7%, whatever, we just need to put that in context. When a house builder, there's three main elements: the land cost, which is fixed when they get their permission, and the selling price. In between is all the build costs. So you strip 5 to 7% costs out, either the developer loses that as profit, or we have to go back to viability and we come back and say, well, we can't afford this contribution, or we can't afford that affordable housing. I think we're just glibly saying 5 to 7% as if that's fine. It's not fine at all. If you had lots and lots of policies in your plan saying 5 to 7%, you'd end up with no profit whatsoever. There just doesn't seem to be a sense to it. Future home standard will be in next year. That's the government standard. That's what people should build to. And we should leave it there.
Okay, thank you. Right, back to the council side.
Great. I've got a few points I'd like to come back to there. So, and I'll just go through them in the order that they came up. So, firstly, about the Planning and Energy Act and the standards that it accepts. So its definition of energy efficiency standards that can be used. It does say standards that endorsed in regulation or in policy. It doesn't have to be both. Therefore, using, I would say, any metric from building regs would fall within what the Planning and Energy Act says. That's exactly what we've done. We've used TER, which is from building regs, and as a step towards that, we've used TFEE, which is also from building regs. So that's my first point. Secondly, on the point about deliverability. So I don't know about deliverability as in analysis of delivery rates of homes after such policies have been introduced. However, a colleague of mine did do an analysis of the rate of applications before and after certain policies were introduced. And this is even more stringent policies than the one that the council at West Berkshire is proposing. These are application rates in central Lincolnshire, Bath and North East Somerset, and Cornwall, which have got those far more ambitious, stringent policies. So excuse me, drying out, which go completely beyond building regs using different metrics even. There wasn't any drop-off in the rate of applications. In fact, in some of those locations, there was an increase in apps after the introduction of those plans, which is really unusual. Usually you see a great big increase in the rate just before the plan is adopted and not just afterwards. So that's interesting. Thirdly, the point on building regs being set nationally, absolutely right. It's set nationally, it's based on national analysis. However, because it's national analysis and it's a standard that's being introduced nationwide, it has to be set at the level of the lowest common denominator. It has to be set as something that is achievable absolutely everywhere. That doesn't mean it's not possible to go further in certain places. It's supposed to be a floor, not a ceiling. And that's exactly why the Planning and Energy Act gives those powers to local authorities to go further, both in terms of energy efficiency and in terms of renewables. The next point, there was a point saying that the TER target that we're aiming for was based on the 2019 consultation. Yes, it was, but that percentage remains true in the more recent consultations. So government has said consistently the Future Home Standard will achieve, I think they said originally, a 70 to 80% reduction on the 2013 building regs. We took straight down the middle and we said 75%. That translates into a 63% increase on today's building regs, and that's what's in the policy. The more recent consultation had basically that same value, that same target. They still said it will do 75% at least on building regs 2013 target emission rate. So that still remains in line with our policy. All that we're doing is saying, please do that part through energy efficiency, i.e. before you add solar panels. You could include the heat pump in that target that we're asking for. So that will take you a long way towards that anyway. There was a point saying the government had committed to net zero carbon by 2030. That's not quite correct. It said it wants to get the grid, the electricity grid specifically, to be close to zero carbon by around that date. That would require an absolutely enormous deployment of renewable energy and also massive grid efficiency upgrades in those years. We're not saying it's a bad thing. It'd be great if it's achieved. However, it's all quite speculative that will be achieved. Grid stress will be higher if we do net zero only through renewables rather than through fabric efficiency. So the more you improve your fabric, the smaller your peak demand gets, because you've got a home that stays at roughly the same temperature rather than having those massive peaks where we heat it and then troughs when we let it get cold again. Reduced peaks mean reduced grid stress. So actually you're taking stress off the infrastructure, or at least you're reducing the amount that you need to invest in that grid infrastructure in order to deliver these homes. It's not really, I would say, super relevant to say if you had lots of policies that each had 5%, then it will become unviable. We've only got this one policy. There's obviously the separate one on affordable housing. That's not one I've been involved with, but I accept that there are other policies that will raise costs as well. However, what we're looking at is this one. And what we're looking at.
Yes, and I mean, the viability assessment looks at them in totality, the cumulative.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
So
and they
I
have
know
been
that.
looked at in that way. I'll just add one final point and then I'll stop. We've talked a lot about the cost increases to build these homes. There is some evidence out there that value of homes goes up when you increase the energy performance rating as well, the EPC band. I don't recall whether we'd actually cited that in our evidence, as I think this might have been something we became aware of after this. This evidence was originally produced for West Berkshire, but I'm happy to send that through if it would be helpful to send that through.
Okay, well, I think that was mentioned when we last discussed it.
Great.
Okay. Yes, yeah.
Just add that Bloor Homes has said that we have the building regs to regulate sustainable homes, but there's a lag in building regs in keeping up with the climate emergency. We don't have the Future Home Standard yet. We hope we'll have it next year, but we don't have it yet. And it was said by Bloor Homes that the courts have said authorities shouldn't go beyond those regulations, but actually that's not what the courts have said, and that's not what the recent case said. In fact, it was specific. Authorities can exceed building regulations provided certain considerations are taken into account. And you've heard the council's position is that it applies those considerations. And I just finished by saying that planning has a key role to play in addressing the climate emergency. That's what the recent consultation said, and that's what this policy does.
Okay, thank you. Anything else, HBF?
A couple of points in terms of deliverability. In terms of applications come forward, you'd expect to see applications go up once the local plan's been adopted, because you obviously got the allocations coming through. There's no indication there in terms of whether there's any viability arguments going on within those applications. The level of delivery. There's no indication in terms of the rate at which those homes will come forward once those applications have been made. So it is a point of, in terms of applications, you can't necessarily say that they don't have an impact on deliverability, because you'd expect to see that, as I'm sure you're aware, sir, in terms of when plans come forward, you get a peak, a spike in terms of applications, because you've got certainty in terms of that you wouldn't necessarily have before that plan is there. In terms of the value, yeah, it can go up, but I suppose the alternative to that is actually also the cost of housing goes up in terms of that. So you're talking about a higher cost in terms of those homes. So obviously you talk about value to the individual is a cost to those other household that's seeking to purchase that house. So I think that those are the swings and roundabouts. Those are the balances that you've got to look at, sir, in terms of that. Is whether the council have adequately addressed those elements of the written ministerial statement in terms of really considering the not just the viability of those, but actually the deliverability, and whether those can be delivered effectively both in the short, medium term, potentially longer term is a different matter altogether. Against what the building regulations is likely to deliver, and what the government's seeking to deliver through that those improvements. And it may be, and in terms of the national grid, I think there are moves to get forward and move towards 2030, but those uncertainties recognised and accept they're there. But that is the aim and ambition, which will ensure that actually these homes are, and homes built to the future home standard, are zero carbon by that date, or even if it's significantly reduced, there is a significant far less carbon being emitted by those homes, even if it's getting down to even if it's not zero carbon by that point. Thank you, sir.
Any view about the point made that the building regs in essence, because they're national, they have to take account of all areas? So I mean, it was described as the lowest common denominator. You may not agree with that phrase, but is there a point that, well, where's West Park? When we talk about deliverability of the housing allocations at various sessions we've had, I've heard it said that, well, West Berkshire's quite strong market demand, values are quite high. Therefore, if you're looking at the typical build out rates on sites, etc., we're above the average and the top median and all those sort of things. So, is there an implication there that if somewhere can achieve higher standards than the building regulations, it's somewhere like West Berkshire?
Yes, sir. I think, but that's viability in general, isn't it?
Yeah.
In terms of, you look at that in terms of whether it's affordable housing and those elements, the stronger markets cannot, conversely, you do then have landowners that will seek more in terms of what their expectation is in terms of land, but that shouldn't be a factor in terms of your considerations in that. There's, as long as there is a reasonable land value attached to that. But it will make it more difficult in terms of sometimes finding those landowners who will come down to that level because of the increasing costs. But yes, you're right. Essentially, what the policy is seeking to do is identify those areas that can go potentially further quicker. But that is within a very clear framework as to how that can be delivered.
Yeah.
And I think that's the essence of it. Saying, well, actually, yeah, you can go further. But really, it's within that very tight framework that's identified through by government. Recognise that it is an or within the Act, but it's been very specific, and I think it is within the judgment that was passed down in terms of actually one of the reasons behind it. And the Secretary of State at the time, back in 2008, did say, yes, we want to be able to ensure that that this is within the framework of building regulations and within the framework set by government, not sort of a random set of standards coming forward, as we're seeing in places like Cornwall, which do go significantly beyond that, but. The council aren't looking at that in terms of the energy use intensity and that sort of thing. So that is welcomed in that sense. But I think it is, we would like to see that sort of flexibility that are expected within the building regulations around actually how you achieve some of that, rather than actually having those very specific fabric energy efficiency standards within it.
Okay, thank you. Understood. Anything else from Bloor Homes? No. No. Okay. Thank you. Okay. Right. Anything else from the council's point of view? No. Okay. Well, thank you for that. So we'll have a break now until 25 to 11, and then we'll come back and look at the second item on the agenda, which is about the RSA 25 policy. Thank you. Okay, it is 10:35, so we'll resume now. I think what I'll do is I'll go around the table again to let people introduce themselves because some RPS weren't here when the introductions were made earlier. If you three would prefer to move down this end, you can do, but if you're happy there, that's fine. I don't mind. You can see and hear me all right? Yeah, okay, thank you. Right, okay. So what we're going to move on to now, as you're aware, is looking at the plans proposals relating to Longcops Farm, Enbourne. Before I just have some introductory comments and some questions for the council, I'll just go around the table again so that people can introduce themselves. Please, thank you.
Emmeline Lambert, barrister for the council.
Cheryl Willett, West Berkshire Council.
Paula Amarelli, West Berkshire Council.
Paul Goddard, West Berkshire Council Highways.
Valerie Boland, Chairperson, Enbourne Parish Council.
Christopher Garrett, Enbourne Parish Councillor.
Peter Tompkins, Enbourne Parish Council.
Richard Boother from RPS, here representing the landowner of Longcops Farm, Mr. Martin Burton.
Okay, thank you. Right, so the evidence relating to the need for 24 plots for residential accommodation for travelling show people referred to in the reasoned justification to policy DM20, along with the proposed allocation RSA 25 at Longcops Farm, were discussed at the hearing session on the 11th of June 2024. I know you weren't there, but others, well, certainly Mr. Tompkins was. On the 18th of June, information from a 2001 appeal decision, exam 36, and a current planning application, exam 37, relating to Longcops Farm were published. They, following a request from me, further to the discussions we'd had earlier. Then the council's responses to my action points 59 and 60 were published on the 3rd of July. That was in document exam 45. And these propose a main modification to the reason justification to policy DM20, paragraph 11.34, aimed at clarifying why the proposal for 24 plots is justified at the Longcops Farm site. And the response also confirms that the indicative map in the plan relating to policy RSA 25 is correct. But the interactive policies map needs to be altered, and the council will no doubt do that at some point if they haven't already done it. So that's clear. We've also had responses to my supplementary question 10.6 from the parish council and from RPS on behalf of the landowner, and from the council, sorry, and these were published on the 10th of September. So I've got all that and I read all those. Last week, I asked the council to provide a plan which was published on Friday, I think, exam 59, showing a number of things. So hopefully you'll have seen that. It shows the extent of the RSA 25 allocation in the plan with a red line. It shows the extent of the site that received planning permission on appeal in 2001 for dual use for agriculture and circus HQ. That's the blue line. It shows the area within that 2001 permission where the parking or storage of caravans, vehicles and equipment associated with the circus HQ is permitted by condition number 2. And finally, it shows with the green hatching the current planning application, the extent of the current planning application site for the siting of up to 24 travelling show people plots. And that the extent of that site was modified during the course of the planning application, and the site that's shown now is the extent of the current proposal. So on the agenda, I did actually put down the planning permission 2001 and the current planning application, but I haven't got any questions separately about those. I'm going to move on in effect to the two main items on the agenda, which is the evidence for the need for 24 plots, and then come on to the extent of the allocation. Obviously, the background, I mean, just to be absolutely clear, obviously there is a current planning application. It's not my role to consider the merits or otherwise of that. I'm here to consider whether the allocation in the plan and the policy relating to it is sound in the context of the National Planning Policy Framework and the PPTS. So I'll just say all that by way of background. So what I'm going to do now is ask some questions to the council first about the evidence of need for 24 plots, and then I'll open it up for others to comment on that. And then I'll move on separately to talk about the maps in effect and the extent of the allocation and how it relates to the previous permission and the current proposal and those sort of things. Right, so I'm just going to go back through some of the background to make sure I understand it. So obviously permission was granted on appeal in 2001 to Mr. Burton, and this was for a dual use of the area shown blue for agriculture and the Circus HQ, including a parking area for 3 caravans for 4 months of the year. So that's the authorised use going back then. And Mr. Burton had bought the site a year or so earlier with the intention of using it as a Circus HQ. And at that time, his business needed 4 plots for mobile homes, caravans for himself, circus manager, secretary, and a general worker. This is that was the background to it. And it needed a grazing land for circus horses and other livestock, hence the dual use. So has the site been used since 2001 as a Circus HQ, as far as the council's aware?
As we're aware, yes.
Yeah, okay. I mean, just listen to the answers on both sides, and then we can come back and I'll take comments from others about that. Okay, so the site was then allocated for 24 travelling show people plots in the Housing and Site Allocations DPD, which was adopted in 2017, but had been prepared in the year or two before that, including based on evidence in the Gypsy and Traveller Accommodation Assessment dated 2015. And other evidence available at the time, including representations from RPS. Yep, so that was adopted. So that policy, though, is not being saved. That, like the rest of those existing adopted plans, is being replaced by this plan.
That's right. We're rolling the allocation forward in the same manner that we've done with the housing.
Yeah,
sites,
yeah.
Yes.
But we're in a position whereby, in effect, it's something that needs to be justified now in the context of evidence available now. The council, I suppose, could have chosen to save a number of policies in the existing plans. It didn't do so. So that's where we are. So around the time of that plan being prepared in 2015, families associated with the circus lived at an unauthorised site at Brent Cross in London. That's what was stated at the time.
Yeah.
And they later had to move from there and leased land in West London on a sort of year-by-year basis, which is said to be expensive and the land has high redevelopment value, meaning the lease may not be renewed. That's what's stated in the evidence. So I'll let RPS come on if you want to update us on any of that in due course. But that was the sort of background. And then in 2018, temporary permissions were granted at Long Copse Farm when the families had to move from Brent Cross, and these were renewed in 2020 because of the pandemic, meaning the circus couldn't operate, so they were there.
Yes.
So in that 2018, 2020 time, how many plots did the temporary permissions allow?
Apologies, sir. I thought I had it written down. It's 22 plots.
Okay. And as far as the council knows, were those plots used, 22 plots or thereabouts? That was what was occupied, was it?
I don't have direct knowledge of,
Okay.
of how many exactly, but I know that they were occupied.
So the council put a proposal in 2018 for 22 plots. It was granted on a temporary basis. And then again, back 2 years later in the pandemic, it was renewed.
It was renewed, yes.
For a temporary basis of 2 years, was it?
Yeah. That was shorter. I think it was
Shorter.
18 months.
Well, given the allocation in the plan, at that time, the plan had been adopted in 2017. Why were these temporary permissions rather than permanent permissions?
I think the plan was that the owner wanted to have a permanent, to do a permanent planning application for the permanent use. At the time, I believe it was the finances that prevented him from doing all of the necessary supporting documents for the planning application. I think with a temporary permission, might not have needed to do so much work with it. That's what I understand.
Okay, well, again, RPS can clarify. So that's the situation. but the temporary permissions has now expired
Now expired.
after whatever time.
I would say, sorry, the owner at the time told us that he was committed to still doing a full plan application for permanent use, but just didn't have the finances at the time.
So the it wasn't that the council gave a temporary permission, it was a temporary permission was applied for.
And I think
the council responded to it on that basis.
Absolutely. And with COVID, it was uncertain with how the circus would operate. Nobody really knew during the pandemic how things would go back to normal or not go back to normal. So, yeah.
Okay, so it was a proposal put to the council, temporary use, based on that's what the needs were at the time, and fair enough. Okay, understood. So the current planning application includes a statement explaining the current need for the plots, and you've used this as part of the justification for the revised wording in the plan for why it's needed, and it refers to plots being needed for older family members who may stay on the site for most of the year, and children living there on a more permanent basis to benefit from uninterrupted education. So that's family members associated with the business, the circus business. And it also goes on to state that if the permission is granted, artists working for the Zippo Circus will start to occupy the site straight away, and they may work for Zippos for a year or two, and it won't be the same families on the site each year.
That's what we've been.
That's what that's your understanding. Mm-hmm. Okay. So the way that the site would be used, as well as the storage of the circus equipment, etc., at certain times, the plots would be occupied at any times of the year, sometimes on a fairly permanent basis by all the older family members and the children, and then other families coming and going depending on where the circus is and who's working at it at the time, etc.
Yeah, absolutely.
You've seen that the parish council suggests that the circus business employs artists from abroad, and they quoted an article in a newspaper, and that they spend time in the winter in their own countries. Does that affect the council's assessment in any way?
I suppose we don't have information on exactly where every artist comes from. I know they come from all over the world, but it doesn't stop them from being from England, Wales, Scotland, and also doesn't stop them from needing accommodation season to season as well. That's what we would say.
So that's not inconsistent with what you said from what the RPS say in terms of artists may work for Zippos for a year or two, and at certain times during that period they may need somewhere to live.
That's
when
it,
they're
just
not
to have that permanent base and move on. And it's like a rolling, I suppose, a rolling need here.
Okay, thank you. And also, I think it's been put to me that it's relevant that this site isn't a personal planning permission tied to a particular business. It's a use for it's a permission for a use, and a use that is recognised in national policy as a specific use for travelling show people headquarters. And there's no restriction on that in terms of, who may operate this business, or indeed it didn't necessarily have to be a circus. So it's travelling show people is a definition in the PPTS. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's what we say in the actual policy, RSA 25 as well. It'd be for travelling show persons.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. So it's also been suggested by the consultants ARC4 and further evidence provided by RPS from the General Secretary of the Showman's Guild about there being a shortage of such sites in the country. So that fact, combined with the lack of a tied permission or any suggestion in the plan that it's for a particular use, I suppose could be seen as part of the justification for why this site is allocated. Is that the council's position, or is this the council's basically saying, well, it's basically justified by the particular circumstances of Zippo Circus and the evidence provided in relation to that? I just want to be clear what the council's position on that is.
And guided by ARC4, and they are the experts in their field, and they know about the national shortage. It just gives that extra justification for having an allocated site, and it's not tied, but it will be for travelling show people. Okay, so the council accepts that there's been a permission. It was granted on appeal a long time ago. It exists. The site's been used for that basis.
It was considered through a previous plan and the council accepted there was a justification or felt there was a justification for it, and it maintains that position. And it's not attempting in any way to restrict that use to any particular business or any particular personal circumstances. So the justification of need is a combination of the particular circumstances that led to the site being started in the first place, and a recognition that actually it's a bit of infrastructure and a use that has value and is needed in the country. Yeah. Okay. Thank you for that. So I'm going to stop there before we start. If there were any discussion about the extent of the allocation, how it relates to various things, I think what I'll do then is ask RPS if there's anything they wish to comment on or add to from what I've summarised and been through with the council. If there's anything further clarification you wish to make, then I'll open it up to the parish council.
Thank you, sir. No, I think that exchange covered all of the salient points from our point of view. I agree with everything that Ms. Willett has said in her answers. I think you've seen our response to your question, so I don't need to go over any of those. I think 2 points probably that are worth making is that I think at any one time there are sort of 20 to 30 artists performing with the circus, and the circus is nothing without the stars, the artists, as it were, and they do have particular needs in terms of accommodation, and that's why we have separate planning guidance on that. I think the greatest demonstration of need that I think we can give you, sir, is the fact that the owner has invested a not insubstantial sum of money now in engaging with the council's pre-application advice service to bring this allocation forward, and obviously the planning application that's currently live and under consideration at the moment. I think short of providing a register and named individuals that will move onto the site, I'm not sure how else we can demonstrate the need for that. There are problems with providing those names. There's no statutory register for doing that. There's no statutory requirement for providing that sort of information. And of course, artists with circus, they literally do come and go. A circus has to keep refreshing its act. We can't keep touring with the same acts. The artists do come and go. And by the time we started the local plan process, if we'd provided a list of names, that roster of artists would be very different now. So I think, without repeating anything that has been said in my statement or what you've just discussed, I haven't really got anything further to add to that, sir.
In terms of the way the circus operates, I mean, traditionally circuses would tend to be from the spring until the autumn, and then there'd be overwintering of the stuff. I think it's been described that that's not necessarily how this business operates, and not all travelling show people will operate like that. And there's no limit on this. Well, actually, the permission does have a limit on the number of months, doesn't it, I think? But the allocation would allow for the flexibility of the site being used at any times of the year for people coming and going. So just roughly then, how does the circus operate at the moment in terms of actually performing, throughout the year?
It's difficult to say. No one year is
Right.
the same, but typically from sort of mid-spring to mid-autumn, the circus would be touring. A number of artists associated with the circus do perform at the Winter Wonderland Festival, or have done in London, and there are other similar sort of Christmas events that the circus is also involved with. So no one year is typical. Each year looks very different, and a different set of events that they would participate in.
Okay.
One thing that did come out of your previous exchange is about the foreign artists. Again, no one artist is different. Some do go back for the winter, others don't. Others, perhaps with families, would prefer to stay over in the winter months, for continuity for any children's education. So
in terms of the reference to some of the older family members and children, are they people that are kind of permanently associated with Mr. Burton's business? I don't know, relatives or regular employees, or are they actually, again, they could just be family members of artists that are just on a year or two contracts or whatever?
I think it's fair to say that if the application is allowed, most of the plots would be occupied by artists. But there may well be a time and a place where people more closely associated with Mr. Burton would occupy the site. But to be absolutely clear on this, and we did discuss this with the case officer, in the event that the application is successful, there will be a condition tying the site to, or restricting the site to, travelling show people that conform with the definition in the planning policy for travellers. So I think it's worth absolutely emphasising.
Yeah, okay. And that PPTS is a clear definition. It's nationally defined and recognised. Okay, thank you. Right, unless there's anything else you wish to say, that's fine. Right, I'll hand over to Enbourne Parish Council. Any responses to what you've heard or anything further you want to tell me?
Thank you, sir. So I think from my understanding, the 2019 and 21 GTAAs effectively roll over the needs assessment from 2015. So that is the assessment that we've got obviously serious concerns about. Enbourne's got a long history with this site, and in 2014, Mr. Burton issued a public letter in which he said that he was contacted by Gary Lugg, Head of Planning from West Berkshire Council, with an inquiry about the possible location of showman's and travellers' yards at my property, which is currently the headquarters of my circus business. He then goes on to set out a distinction between showmen and travellers, and he says that he agreed in principle with West Berkshire Council's request to submit a proposal for circus showman's yards on my property. So the original instigator, if you like, of the need from Enbourne's perspective, and I think this is backed up by various correspondence with the parish council at the time, district councillors, was that this was something that West Berkshire was seeking to allocate, as opposed to a need arising from the circus itself. And I think these points have been put to the council on various occasions because, of course, this came before the needs assessment in 2015, and in fact before the 24 plots allocation came before the needs assessors spoke to Mr. Burton himself. And so we've, apart from the fact that the 2015 assessment is now substantially out of date and not adequate by various definitions, our real concern is that the needs that are claimed are not really there from the circus perspective, but perhaps from the councils.
Okay. You've heard though since 2014 this letter. Various things have happened, and evidence has been provided, mainly through, I suppose, RPS and through ARC, discussions about the need for, well, two things. One, travelling show people accommodation and yards in the country, and secondly, the way this particular business operates. I know you've provided some information to me about what you think about that, but you've heard what's been said now about the way it typically employs 20 to 30 artists for sometimes on 1 or 2 year contracts, and there's always a rolling need for these people to have somewhere as a base to go back to in between actually working on, out on the road. So whatever this letter was 10 years or so ago, even if there was, well, I'm not disputing this as a letter, but haven't things moved on? And isn't it clear from what's been said, or as clear as can be, that there is a business that actually has a real need now, and also that there is a need nationally for travelling show people yards?
So take the last point first. Your question about whether the evidence is adequate. So we referred to the Planning Advisory Service guidance on what that means. And it's very clear that the evidence has to be focused on the spatial area concerned. You know, we're in West Berkshire doing a local plan.
That PAS isn't specifically about travelling show people, is it?
No, it's specifically, sorry, so it's all about evidence for plan making.
Yeah, and I'm aware of past guidance, but I mean, one, it's not national policy, and two, it's fairly, well, anyway.
Well, I think, yeah, so I don't want, obviously that's your judgment, but what is adequate in terms of is whether the evidence is focused on the spatial area. So I don't think, in other words, I don't think a national or strategic need for a site would be, even if it was presented, which I don't think we've actually seen any evidence of that.
Well, you've seen the letter from RPS have provided from the chairman of the guild. I mean, that backs up from what Mr. Bullock said from his own research about there being difficulties in finding these sites for these sort of uses.
Well, I think that letter was submitted in draft format and it hasn't arrived on the planning portal. So I don't know if it was actually in evidence, but yeah.
Okay. But anyway, your point would be, well, there needs to be if this site is to be allocated, and there ought to be a local need for it. It shouldn't be something that's to fill some unspecified national need.
I mean, I think that, yeah, absolutely. This is, you know, in terms of assessing the evidence of need against what the standards are for such evidence to support a local plan policy, you know, the words used are really quite clear. The data has to be reliable. It has to enable analysis. So, for example, relying on the figure from 2015, which predicted a need over a planned period to 2029. Clearly, there's a substantial variation there. Can we look at household growth? There's been no assessment of that. So the evidence is really, it doesn't tick the boxes in terms of what I think we should be expecting from the evidence.
Okay.
Now, obviously, we have the background to the applicant and site owner, and so we have some concerns. So we're looking to the evidence really that the council's putting forward to give us assurances, and we just don't see that at the moment.
Okay. Right. Anything further you want to say about? As I say, I'm not here to consider the merits of the particular proposal. I mean, I suppose if you have particular concerns about the suitability of the site for the proposed use, you may as well outline what those are in summary. If that's something you wish to do.
Well, I think probably those points have been made and sort of made fairly extensively in the current application. The one thing I would like to highlight is the plan that you were sent on the 27th of September. Sets out an area, the orange hatching, which is keyed as conditioned storage. And
sorry, I was going to come on to the maps in a minute, but and I will do. So do you want to just pause on that? But is there anything more general about need and the suitability of the use in principle that you want to say before I do move on to the detail of the different?
Yeah, sure. Well, I mean, I think I think any reasonable person would concur with the appeal inspector's findings from 2021 that there's no reason in principle why the site wouldn't be suitable at the scale that was proposed at the time, and that with the adequate screening and the landscaping measures that were secured, the site is not overly visible and doesn't, in that respect, affect the character of the area and the level of use, which is not, I would say, has not been consistent over the time. Right. Has not had although some people would say has had a very adverse effect on the local road network, it's not been unmanageable. Obviously, all of those things would change with the scale of development that would be proposed under this allocation.
So from your experience, when you say that the site's been used and the permission for the dual use, which was restricted to a certain area, which we'll come on to, and it was also limited to 4 plots, I think, wasn't it? Or a house and 4 plots. And that's broadly the scale that you were saying, well, that may be appropriate in this location. But something different or larger than that may well not be. Is that the point?
Yeah, well, absolutely. So, I mean, it's been shown that we've been able to live with that scale of development, but that scale of development is substantially different. I mean, look, we've had lots of people giving us a really hard time over the size of the lorries coming down and trying to, navigate into the site and so on. There's been all sorts of sort of low level, I don't want to say low level, but there's been all sorts of concerns about the way the site's been used. But I think, recent developments have caused more concern because it does appear that the uses are proliferating away from just the circus use. But those things aside, I would agree with the appeal inspector's decision-making from 2001, that with those adequate safeguards of landscaping and buffering, that scale of use in that area, can be accommodated without, seriously adverse harm.
Okay. Yeah, understood. Okay, so when you say the scale of the use, obviously 24 plots is significantly more than 4. In terms of the implications of that for large vehicles, etc., your concern is, well, that it's the fact that there's more residential plots or plots for accommodation and associated vehicles, etc., for each one. Your concern is that actually that could generate also more HGVs, etc.
Well, I think this is where we go back to understanding where the need arises from, because the 22 plots were accommodated on a fraction. The temporary permission were accommodated on a fraction of the site area that's now proposed. And again, we're not sure how many people live there, but the permission was granted on a temporary basis for 22 plots, I think. So the concern is that if we're now obviously enlarging this to a much larger area, if that involves individual travelling showmen and their families with, large circus equipment in addition to what's already been on the site, then the highways impacts certainly alone would become intolerable.
Okay, I'll just go back to RPS on the terms of what the design of this particular layout, which broadly, I suppose, in terms of the extent of the coverage of the plots, is consistent with what the allocation is. But we'll come on to the detail. But just in terms of the rationale for the size and layout of the plots, do you want to just explain what each one would be designed to accommodate?
Yes, I'll do my best. I mean, essentially, the plot sizes are derived from the guidance from the Showman's Guild in terms of plot sizes. I'm afraid I don't know what they are off the top of my head, but I can provide the relevant guidance on that.
But what are they intended? I think there's got information in the PPTS about this as well, isn't there?
Yes.
Of the sorts
So
of things that are to be...
essentially, the reason why the PPTS makes the distinction between gypsy and traveller pitches and showman's plots is because it's not only to accommodate the the residential accommodation, but because of the nature of the artists and their acts, often they're self-employed people. They often need that extra space to look after the vehicles, look after the equipment associated with their acts, and that's accommodated on. And the size of the plots is derived from the need to have an area where they can carry out that maintenance.
Okay. So the way that the circus itself will have its own large vehicles and equipment, yeah, and that will be stored on the site somewhere. But in addition, what you're saying is each of the 24 plots for each artist, as they come and go, they need some space for their own vehicles and their own equipment, depending on what their particular role in the circus or the travelling show people business is.
Correct, and you can see, sir, from the applications map, you can see where the centralised equipment, if you like, is currently stored, and that will remain unchanged. It's most unlikely that each of the individual acts will have their own HGVs associated. They may have their own vehicles, but they certainly wouldn't have their own HGVs associated with their acts.
So when you say the centralised area, it's on the. I'm looking at the planning application.
Yes, that area on the right hand
Yeah.
side, you can see the existing trucks and the maintenance shed and other ancillary outbuildings on there. So that will remain unchanged.
Yeah. So it's a mixture, as I said, of that centralised area with the big vehicles and the big equipment, and then the individual plots being a mixture of accommodation and their own vehicles and some smaller equipment.
Could I just make one
Yeah.
other quick observation? The temporary permission, I think I'm right in saying that while it did accommodate 22 families at the time, I don't think they were anywhere near the size that the Showman's Guild would have recommended for the temporary permission.
No, that was. It was a temporary, and it was just
temporary emergency situation.
Okay. Right. Okay. Anything further from this before we move on to looking at the extent of the site? Yeah.
So yeah, it's just sort of the thought arises then where the lorries and HGVs associated with the temporary permission were stored.
The individual vehicles for the individual plots.
Obviously, we've seen the Zippo Circus lorries stored at the site now.
Yeah.
So the question, in terms of the highways impact, which allegedly has been assessed, if these 24, we're talking about 10 times the site area of potentially HGVs. Where were they kept during the temporary permission, if they exist?
Yeah. Okay. Understood. Right. Okay. Anything further the council wish to say based on this sort of the background and the evidence of need before I just look at the maps just to understand what's the background is and what's now proposed?
Don't think I've got anything.
No. Okay. Thank you. Right. Let's just look at the map then, if we could. So thank you for providing that. And as I said, it shows essentially four things. In terms of the area that, well, it's shown on the aerial photograph as well, isn't it? Which is the area that's used for storing of the larger vehicles. But the area that was subject to condition number 2 on the 2001 appeal decision, the condition number 2 refers to a particular plan, which I think I couldn't find that reference number when I looked through the plans that were attached to the appeal. It was a bit confusing, but the council has patched an area which it interprets as being the area that was subject to the planning condition number 2.
It's because it's such an old file, and forgive me, sir, for not providing this initially. It did involve a lot of digging. Everything's been scanned in, and I'm not sure if a colour has been missing. So that's what we interpret condition 2. It may, I suppose, it may include the actual mobile home, the farmhouse as well, which is.
So you did provide a plan Annex B to exam 45.
Yes, yeah.
And that's one of the plans from the planning commission.
Yes.
What it didn't seem to have on is the reference number that condition number 2 referred to that I could see, but maybe it does and I couldn't see it.
Oh, well, we appended the plan. Sorry, we did append that plan to our response in AP 59. AP
Yeah, exam
15.
45, Annex B.
Yeah.
That has got that reference number on, is it?
Yeah, that's the reference number.
Okay, fine.
Yeah, for the condition.
So, okay. Anyway, that broadly, I can see how that correlates broadly with the
Yeah.
area that's hatched. And on the aerial photograph, you can also see how that relates to where the main lorries and things are
Yeah.
stored at the
So
moment.
it's probably a little bit larger than what we've had on the maps we provided you last week.
Okay.
Apologies for that.
Okay, but the point being that the allocation, this red line of the allocation that's shown on the in the plan as submitted, doesn't need to be changed from your point of view, and on the map that you've now provided, that storage area is obviously within that,
Yes.
But it also, and the current planning application also is contained within that allocation red line in terms of the plot layout.
In terms of the plot layout.
Yeah,
Yes, yes.
but the additional area for, is it drainage?
Drainage, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
is within the site that has planning permission for the dual use, including
Yes.
agriculture.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. But that doesn't, anyway, leaving aside the planning application, even if the planning application were to be approved as it is, it wouldn't necessarily mean the allocation would need to be altered.
No, I think we were mindful to keep the allocation as it was, to concentrate the plots and development itself nearer to the existing built form rather than to effectively allow in principle to go further west.
Okay, thank you. Anything else you want to say about so the extent of the allocation is still appropriate from the council's point of view for the proposal that's policy refers to.
That's,
Yeah, okay.
that's fine, thank you.
Thank you. Right, anything else RPS want to say about the various different bits of land that are contained by the different lines?
Only just to emphasise that, yes, the reason for the extension was to accommodate the drainage scheme. I did have a meeting with the case officer a couple of weeks ago. If it looks better, we can. We've got a couple of other issues that we're working on with them. If it looks better, we can further rationalise that area so it just deals with the drainage scheme. But that is the only reason why that area was extended.
But in terms of the allocated site,
yeah, no,
that's fits with what your layout proposes for in terms of the suitable plot sizes and the use proposed. Yeah. Okay, right. Back to the parish council in terms of, sorry, I kind of deflected you off something you were going to say earlier about the various areas.
So, sorry, just going back to the plan that you started with.
Yes.
So the area is obviously substantially, that was approved as limiting the circus use in 2001 is substantially different from what the council's sent you. And the reason that's important is because the appeal inspector clearly recognised that the circus use should be restricted to that part of the site so that the harm associated with that sort of development could be contained and ameliorated by the bundings and the ditches and the screening and so on. It also, of course, means that the yard is an identified area on the site, and it could not reasonably be interpreted as the larger part of the site or the allocation, the proposed allocation area.
Understood.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, well, the 2001 planning application, obviously the blue line that's shown on this map was quite a considerable area, and that reflected the dual use. And as you say, the appeal was allowed on the basis that the circus element of the dual use would be restricted, and there were reasons for that. And like I've read the letter, etc. So I understand the point that the allocation is facilitating something significantly different to that in terms of the extent of the circus plot uses and the.
Absolutely. And the conclusions of the 2019 and 21 GTAAs clearly say that the existing yard should be safeguarded. They don't, it doesn't say that more agricultural land is needed for more residential or other accommodation. So I think if our policy is going to be consistent with the up-to-date evidence, the definition of that existing yard, which accommodates for residential plots already, albeit not used, should really be, if the allocation area is to be consistent with the evidence, really needs to be reduced to that area.
Okay, understood. But as you've heard from RPS, if the business says it needs 24 plots and they need to meet the sort of standards that are expected nationally, that wouldn't be sufficient, is what they'd say. And therefore it comes back to the argument, do you need 24 plots and is there evidence of needing that on the scale? So I think I've got that. Before, I think I've covered everything pretty much I need to do, but I'll allow anyone to say anything else. But there was something that the council said in its statement I just want to deal with. If I decided that there wasn't sufficient evidence to justify the particular proposal for 24 plots, the plan could remove I could recommend the plan be modified to remove the allocation, in which case obviously there's still an authorised use, which is for a dual use of a larger area, subject to a planning condition limiting the certain things being done on part of it. Doesn't quite limit the Circus HQ, I don't think, to that, but it limits certain activities to part of it. But you say then, well, then what would then happen would be, it would be subject to policy DM20, which safeguards existing authorised sites and allows their expansion, provided they do not conflict with criterion D and they comply with various criteria 1 to 9.
Yes, yes.
Okay, so that would give you a framework. There are some traveller sites in West Berkshire, aren't there?
Gypsy and Traveller, this is already,
yeah. Gypsy and traveller sites.
and this is already travelling show.
Yes. And they're subject to that policy DM20.
Yes.
Are the authorised sites defined on the policies map?
They should be. I think again the interactive map would need updating to reflect the authorised, and actually since our last hearings more have been approved, so we would need to keep updating the interactive map.
So anyway, the intention would be to put a line on the policies map defining an authorised traveller site.
Yes, to
gypsy
reflect planning permission. Yes.
If this site were not allocated for 24 plots, it would be subject to policy DM20. What would be the starting point for the site it would? I mean, I suppose one approach would be, well, I can just forget about this, and that would be something that have to be sorted out through development management. Because there could be an argument, couldn't there, about, well, are we talking about an expansion of the bit of the site that's got permission subject to a restrictive condition, or the blue line, that's the authorised dual use site? I don't know. It's
Yeah, I get your point, sir. I think I'm looking at it more that the authorised use. I suppose on this one it is I was thinking it was the yard itself that is safeguarded, because that is where the circus operations are got that condition, and an expansion to that would be effectively into where the allocation is proposed. And then
then you'd apply the criteria in policy DM20.
That's how I would interpret it, and that's probably how I would advise colleagues in DM in decision making.
Okay, so that would provide a framework, but it would be, rather than a sort of a positive proposal for 24 plots for this particular travelling show people use, it would be a default back to there's an authorised use, and any expansion of it would need to meet these various criteria.
Yes, and I suppose then it's that it will come again to the need, and that would come into decision making.
Let me just have a look at DM20 then. I don't want to start going through applying it.
No, but I suppose actually DM20 doesn't actually say anything about looking at need.
No, I don't think it does it? No. It just means that if there's a proposal from an existing traveller site, it basically is a positive policy, provided you meet a number of criteria.
You're right, yeah.
Yeah, okay. As would be the case in, other forms of development usually, wouldn't it? Okay. Okay, well, I just wanted to just understand what that position would be, because you had mentioned it as a possibility. RPS, do you want to comment on that? No, okay. Parish Council?
Yeah, I think that sort of the application of a policy along those lines, DM20, sort of better reflects really the character of what we're looking at here, which appears to be answering the needs of an individual business as opposed to the needs of a broader community.
Okay, thank you. Right. Is there anything else anybody wishes to say about this before we close for today? No, okay, thank you. Right, so that brings us an end then to the further sessions we've had this week. I don't think there's anything else I can really say at this stage. I mean, my intention is that is the end of the hearing sessions as far as I would expect, subject to any further deliberations I have on the things that we've talked about this week. And as I've done in the past, I'll do a note based on, you know, the things. I mean, there was one thing that came out of yesterday was the issue around the broad location for growth of north of Newbury, which, as I said, I would have a think about and give some feedback. I don't know whether there's anything else you want to say about that on reflection. I'll just see what I have to say about it and then take it from there. Okay, so I think I also asked you broadly to think about what potential timetable may be in terms of the council's process. Again, you don't need, I mean, if there's anything you want to say about that, you can do, but
We haven't had an opportunity to consider that yet.
Okay, well, on the basis that I will do a note in the next week or so that may have some relatively limited action points, unless there's something more significant I need to raise, the process thereafter would be about finalising proposed main modifications, having responded to any of these action points I have, and then the various processes that we kind of talked about in terms of sustainability appraisal, potentially habitat regulations, assessment update, and the council sort of decision-making process. So we'll leave it at that. Okay, anything else you want to say before we close?
So just to say, anticipating that we won't see you again in any hearings. Thank you very much for the fair and efficient way that you've run the hearings. Everyone at the council is very grateful.
Okay, thank you. Well, thank you all for your contributions as well. And from all those who've participated over the various different sessions that we've had. Okay, thank you all, and see some of you again, no doubt, at some point.